home run riches from the Maryland Lottery, I have the chance to win cash or to be selected as a contestant of the game. I can win $500 for every Orioles home run, plus $5,000 for a grand slam. Things can get pretty nuts! Make the right call and play home run riches from the Maryland Lottery.
Good morning, Baltimore. It is Thursday, April 23rd, and the NFL Draft has officially arrived. Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the Early Birds Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Weyrich, alongside our Ravens reporter, Sam Cohn, here on a pivotal day for the Baltimore Ravens, who draft at the number 14 overall spot. We have talked about this pick, and we'll continue to talk about this pick today as we get ready for what largely is expected for the Ravens, as we will talk about, to draft a offensive lineman here, but certainly lots of options on the table. Sam, amid this whirlwind of a week, how you doing?
Happy to be here, excited to be here. I pointed out we're going to have the interview in a little bit, in a couple minutes, with the Philadelphia Inquirer's Devin to break down a lot of some of the defensive guys in this draft and some things the Ravens could do in this draft. And he made the point, and I called him on this too, because I like that he said it. He's talking about how his prep for the draft, and he's like, it's a long sprint. And I was like, that's sort of it's an oxymoron, but it's also a truism of football. Because he's grinding tape in the summer, and then it just like, it's here before you know it. Suddenly it's Thursday, day one of the NFL draft. So it'll be fun to dive into all this. And the other thing I wanted to point out to you, Matt, too, is that we did staff picks for what we think the Ravens are going to do at 14. And I think like 6 out of 8 of us all picked Vanga Ioane, all on the same page, he's been the most popular mocked guy to the Ravens, despite some teetering here and there. He's been the most popular name to the Ravens at 14, basically since the NFL Scouting Combine. But it's funny how many people have gone with him, despite Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta telling us at the aptly named Liars Luncheon, that smokescreen day, where he says one thing that he's adamant about in his draft strategy is try not to be predictable. And last year, Malachi Starks was that guy. From scouting combine to draft, the most mocked guy. So if they pick Vanga Ioane, then maybe we can, at least 2 years of that sample size, can say, maybe EDC's getting a little predictable on what he wants to do, which is funny. But yeah, long sprint, but we're finally here. Happy to be here, excited and interested to see what happens tonight.
Yeah, maybe DeCosta wants us to think he's not going to be predictable by being predictable. So it's all mind games here.
It's reverse psychology. You ever seen the movie War Games?
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's doing. He's sitting in the war room just mapping all this out and maneuvering the board and getting weird, and then he's just going to he's leading teams down other paths. He's going to pick the guy everyone thinks they're going to pick.
He's the man in the chair making all the shots, and
that's right.
Certainly a huge day for this organization, but we do have a bit of news here that we wanted to hit on before we dove into draft stuff, and that is Nnamdi Madubuike underwent surgery last week, as ESPN Adam Schefter reported the other day. Huge news that they expect hope for him to be back in 2026. Sam, what does this do for the outlook of the Ravens defense heading into this season?
Simply put, it's huge. Quite the news dump on I think it was Tuesday morning. It's been 6, almost 7 months since Nnamdi got hurt, and we've heard next to nothing. I think there was some reasonable thought and speculation that like we might get to training camp day 1 and he just might be out there. He just might be there or not. Is there ever going to come a day where he says something or he's there? Or how are we going to find out? It got to the point where we were asking ourselves, how are we going to find this out? Of course, it was ESPN's Adam Schefter. So just to kind of give a quick recap, I mean, it's week 2. They're playing Cleveland. Nnamdi comes out. He's a neck injury. John Harbaugh says in the following week, like, hey, we don't specifically see anything in the game of how that happened, but we know he ruled him out. Things got super cagey from there. We never got a straight answer. Things only got weirder. There were other opinions, and just kind of fast forwarding, every member of the Ravens brass, decision maker, coach, GM, front office, owner, president has said, like, hey, we're not, it's TBD, or we're not sure yet, or we're going to let him answer, or whatever. So yeah, 6 months later, we find out that he gets surgery on his neck. We don't know the specifics of what the injury is, But it sounds like, as you said, they're hopeful he's going to be available in 2026. And to answer your question, that would be huge for their defense because, when Jesse Minter got hired, he introduced his coordinators. Anthony Weaver was asked specifically, like, hey, you're taking over a defense that was not very good in 2025. Why do you think that is? Jesse Minter was asked, what were a defensive guru, what did you see as the issue in 2025? And a lot of those answers started with, it was spiraling out of the loss of Nnamdi, their all-pro defensive tackle who has had, his sack numbers are among the best in the league from 2023 to the start of 2025 before he got hurt. So an anchor in that defense, such an important piece of that pass rush and that run defense and what they've been able to do. As we know, the Ravens really struggled in that area last year. So it's big they're going to get him back. The question then, well, let me say this. It's big that they hope or have plans that they intend to hope they can get him back. Obviously, how he recovers from surgery and goes through training camp will determine that. But if they're able to get him back, the question is, will he be at full Nnamdi Madubuike capacity? Like to what percentage is he himself? But certainly positive news coming out of Owings Mills that they have cautious optimism or hope or whatever word you want to use that he'll be back on that defense. And we're gonna talk a lot of draft stuff in the interview, and it certainly changes their draft strategy because, listen, Eric DeCosta has said, hey, whether or not they have Nnamdi doesn't change the calculus. They want to draft an interior defensive lineman. Matters a lot more if you have that guy and whether you're looking for a depth piece or you need someone who can come in and play right away. And it sounds like if they have enough hope or optimism that they're not looking for a day one, they might wait till rounds 3 or 4 potentially. And Devin and I get into this a little bit of like when makes sense, how deep is this class, but it just changes the way you're looking at that position and can help structurally for them to figure out how to kind of war game the draft of when that's a position that they need to address and they can figure things out. So big news for them, big news to get before the draft, and exciting for Ravens fans because obviously there's been a lot of speculation about whether his career might be over. So it's exciting news for him to at least have a chance to get back on the field.
Yeah, certainly number one, you're glad that he's getting this taken care of and something where he has a positive enough outlook where he'll be possibly able to play football again as soon as 2026. But honestly, just for the Ravens to get clarity on this situation is probably the biggest boon of all, for them to know exactly what they're dealing with heading into next year and how much they might be able to count on Madubuike for. That being said, it would be very optimistic to expect him to be ready for week 1 of the season. So, you kind of do know potentially that you might have a couple of weeks at minimum to start the year where you're going to need somebody else to step in. So knowing that you have that roster need, even if it might be short term, kind of gives you a sense of how you might want to attack that, whether it is through the draft or whether it's through a cheap free agent signing or something like that. But you are going to want to pad that room one way or another. And they now also know that you don't have to necessarily raise the alarm bells on that position, thinking that you might not have him at all and have to find more of a long-term or star caliber solution. So either way, they just kind of know their path forward.
Exactly, because how good can that defensive line be? Like last year, it was one of the, we talked so much about how the offensive line was their biggest hitch. That defensive line was really, really struggled. They were calling up practice squad guys, rookies, guys who had not played a ton of football to fill those roles. In 2026, week 1, there's a realistic possibility that defensive line is Trey Hendrickson, Nnamdi Madubuike, Travis Jones, Mike Green, Tavius Robinson, and I think you feel pretty good if those guys are all at what they are at their best. If Mike Green takes a step forward, if Tavius Robinson continues to take another step forward, he's been great for them and such an important guy in that room. If Nnamdi is close to what he's been, if Travis Jones gets freed up a little bit because he was taking on a lot of double teams without Nnamdi. So if he is what you expect him to be, and then if Trey Hendrickson is still Trey Hendrickson, then I think if you're the Ravens, you feel pretty good about where you're at with that defensive line.
The AFC North suddenly could be employing 2 of the best defensive tackles in football, with Madubuike expected to be back now, but also Dexter Lawrence being traded over to Cincinnati and wholly overpay there. You talk about the Ravens doing something uncharacteristic in that Max Crosby deal that it didn't end up happening. But for the Bengals to trade such a significant draft asset for a player who is not at a premium position necessarily and is going to be paid at the top of the market, I mean, I don't know. It was an interesting asset management, but at the end of the day, it is a move that I think they needed to make just for the 10th overall pick. I don't know.
Sexy Dexy goes to Cincinnati, and then John Harbaugh gets the number 10 pick, and John Harbaugh picks Wenger Ioane to replace Daniel Falele in New York and takes the guy that the Ravens.
That's just like two kicks in the nuts to the Ravens back to back.
Right.
Yeah. Some scorned X's here, it appears. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and let's talk the draft. Sam, you sat down with Devin Jackson of the Philadelphia Inquirer, NFL draft guru for them, has done a ton of work prepping for this weekend and has a very interesting mock draft that you guys unpack. So be sure to give that a full listen. And Orioles fans, never fear, we will talk some baseball on the other end of the interview, unpack what was a very interesting road trip for the Orioles, both in Cleveland and in Kansas City. So stay tuned for that on the other end.
Very happy to have Devin Jackson join us in the Early Birds podcast. Devin writes about college football, covers the NFL draft for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Before that, Devin worked at NOLA.com as a sports digital content editor, sports betting producer. Devin grinds a lot of tape, which is why we want to have him on this podcast. And he works his butt off all times of the year, but particularly during draft season. Devin, thanks so much for joining on the pod. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you as well. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here and a few days out from the draft too. So excited to talk through these prospects and, I hope the draft gets here quicker, than it is right now.
For sure. So you just arrived in Pittsburgh, and this is your third time covering the NFL draft. I'm just curious, what have you learned about covering this event? It feels like such a unique experience in the sports landscape.
Yeah, it's so unique. I mean, it's such a destination type of event. Like, I feel like, not many people are like, I need to get to the NBA draft, I need to get to the NHL draft and MLB draft. Those events, I feel like, especially like NHL and MLB are, so different, like it's not like this big, 3-4 month race to it and that people are jumping in and talking about prospects. I feel like, the NBA maybe to some degree has some of the similar characteristics where a lot of people are excited about a lot of these players, but you really get to know these players, these college football players that turn into NFL players over the last 2 or 3 years. Most of these guys have been standouts since they were freshmen or, early in their careers. You think about Caleb Downs specifically. He's a guy that has been a star since he was a freshman at Alabama. So I think it's so cool to be able to have an event that's free for everyone to get in. So, like, if you just all you're really covering, if you're a fan, to come to the NFL draft is you're obviously the pay to stay there and all those things. But in terms of getting there, it's free to get in. And I think that's so unique in the NFL landscape where, it can be expensive to get to NFL events and NFL games, playoff games, Super Bowl. But I think the draft is so unique in that aspect. A lot of these people that are just getting to know these prospects it's really cool to see, them want certain players for certain teams, So I think it's such a unique event and then being able to cover it. You get to talk to these guys before they, have, some of the biggest day or days of their lives before they, become, professionals. And it's a really unique experience that I think, not many people get to say they've been able to attend or cover NFL drafts events. So I always feel fortunate to be able to do it.
It's free to get in, but I saw that Steelers owner Art Rooney went on a radio show this week and was like, he saw the seating chart and he saw that Ravens fans were ahead of Steelers fans. So it's free to get in, but you might get moved if your rival team is the one hosting the host side of the draft. Devin, you mentioned that you are working tonight. We just talked a minute off camera just about some of the stuff that kind of in the lead up to the actual draft and what it's like there in Pittsburgh. What does covering draft weekend look like for you?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's really whatever I'm able to gather. It just kind of like one of those things that, I don't really know what you're going to get until you're there, So for me, usually starts on the day before the draft, where they have a prospect availability with the media after they do a community service event and do some interactive things, and usually with the local youth. So a lot of kids from Pittsburgh get a chance to interact with these players and go through football drills or, get the football thrown to them, all those different things, go through drills with the players and really get a chance to get to know them. So that's always a cool part of it. But then on the actual draft day, you are invited, as a part of the media to be on the red carpet. And usually those, you don't really glean too much from it, because everybody wants to talk to every single prospect that comes through, and there's only 16 guys. And usually, since we're more in the print media side of things, so we're toward the end of the red carpet as opposed to like the TV people that get the cameras and they're able to do on-camera interviews with these players. But by then, it's more about their outfit or these light questions. What does it mean to have your family with you? A lot of them have their parents or siblings with them, or maybe they have significant others with them. So it's really a cool way to see what they're like. And then the actual draft itself, waiting to see if there's going to be a player that like specifically the Eagles, is there going to be a player here that they take? And I've been lucky enough, the last 2 drafts I've been to, they took Jalen Carter in Kansas City in 2023, and then last year they took Jahad Campbell, who ended up being a local kid as well, and I got a chance to talk to him the day before. So we'll see if that trend continues. But then, afterwards is, who were the best players available for day 2, who were guys, good, they're going to be around for day 3. And that's where I feel like, studying in depth about these prospects, it really pays off, because then it kind of thins out in the amount of knowledge that people have about players that get selected on day 2, that get selected on day 3, and they're kind of in that catch-up mode doing research. And I've been able to watch a lot of these players, and hopefully most of the guys that get drafted, I have something to say about them.
Yeah, one more question on you to kind of transition into getting into this draft class specifically. When do you start like really grinding tape of these guys? And I'm curious, are there certain tendencies that sort of changed over the years? Maybe the way the league has evolved, or just what you've learned about the draft, learned about covering in terms of how you're evaluating to put together your mock and to best cover these guys?
Yeah, I think the truly like trying to get a sense of the players really starts in the summer before the season. So in July and August is when I start to really ramp up. Because it's such a long sprint to the draft, and you're spending a lot of time and a lot of nights watching players and prospects and getting a feel for them. But yeah, I think for me, it used to be, I'll just jump on it around November, December. And then I think during the 2023 cycle, I figured out I probably need to start earlier, because there's so much that happens between January and April that it makes it difficult to truly get a sense of watching these players and really getting a good sense of that without, feeling, other people and what their opinions are of players kind of creep into your own thoughts. So I think it becomes difficult by the time March comes around, because then everyone's kind of starting to catch up on the top players and you don't want to be kind of catching up. So for me, it starts like July, August, and, throughout the season, like I'm, checking in on players, seeing, if, the guys I'm expecting to be in that first, second round area. There's various things that, you can get from other people. Like there's a Blesto list that, goes through basically all the draft eligible players and where the league kind of sees them, heading into the season. There's different way too early mocks that you can kind of tap into. And just even as you're watching other players, other ones kind of, show up on your screen too and show up on your radar. So I think the way to do it is like, I usually try to get it organized and around that time, July, August, and figure out, all right, these are the players that I know I need to watch during the year and make a priority. So by the time, January comes around at the end of the season, when my job asks me to do a mock draft, I have a good feeling of where, things are kind of projected, where they're feeling. And then things change, as you go along the process, when you go to the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl, and then you go to the Combine, these are always places you try to get information from and get a better sense of where these players are valued, the way that the league kind of values them when you get to talk with like NFL scouts and people like that and people that know people inside the NFL. Like when you start, a lot of the chatter happens, you get a better sense of how these teams feel about players. And yeah, it's always an information gathering process, I think, this time of year, because, you want to have a sense of like, this is where a player could go or should go. And then you start to get a range of these different players, and that helps with mocks. It doesn't, you're not just putting people in just kind of on the whim. You kind of have a good feeling of where they're generally valued and kind of not necessarily where the consensus lies, but where you think, these players kind of fit in the puzzle of the NFL draft.
Yeah, you use that phrase long sprint, which I think is both a truism for football and also an oxymoron, because it really does feel like a sprint to the draft, but it can also some days feel like, I got all this time, and the next thing you know, it's here. Kind of getting into, again, like this class, and we're inching up toward the draft. I want to ask about your mock, and like a lot of mock drafts around the folks who cover this kind of stuff, you have Ruben Bain Jr., the edge rusher from Miami, coming off the board very early. Is there a way you see him falling into Baltimore's lap at 14? I think that's sort of this like ancillary thought is like if they don't get one of these major guys, like there's a very real chance that someone like Ruben Bain could just by happenstance fall to Baltimore. Why do you think that is? Do you see a way that happens, and if so, why?
I don't think it's impossible. I think sometimes it just depends on, all right, if this player doesn't go inside the top 10, who is going inside the top 10 instead of him? And I think you kind of play all the different scenarios. And I think it's always good to kind of change up sometimes where players end up going and where you think they might go, and more so have ranges in mind of players where they could go versus like pretty rigid, like I feel like they should, he should go here, or he should fit here. I think so. I think that I would feel inclined to say he probably won't be available when the Ravens pick at 14, and just because it feels like there are teams outside like the top 10 area that I feel like would jump at the chance to get a player like Bain, if he starts to slide down the board a little bit. I know there's been a lot of talk on teams that really want to trade out of their spots. Like you look at the Cardinals, they really want to trade out of 3. The Browns want to trade back as well, just to get more resources. I think there might be a few other teams that are open to trading back to. Maybe the Giants at 10. Now that they have 5 and 10, they could be willing to trade back. So I will say I don't think he's going to fall to 14, but I do think he has a possibility he could fall in a range that the Ravens could feel comfortable enough that they want to trade up and go get him. So I think that's kind of the way that I frame it and see it. I expect, like, if he's there at 9 for the Chiefs, I expect the Chiefs to be a team that wants to take him. If he's, there for, the Dolphins at 11 or, the Cowboys at 12, maybe they feel inclined to take him. So I think there are going to be other opportunities for other teams to get into the mix, and I think it would be important if Baltimore really feels like Ruben Bain can be a difference maker for their defense, a small trade up isn't out of the question. Now I know like that's not really the Baltimore,
I was going to say it's not something they tend to do, but you're right.
Yeah. I know it's not something they typically do, but I will say I've been telling a lot of people this is not your atypical draft. This is not a draft where, there are 20 guys that really have first round grades. I think it's, for some teams it's like 12 to 14, maybe it's a little bit less than that. So 14 to me feels like the tipping point of like, all right, now it's kind of the draft is going to start to shift a little bit where it's not going to fall in the line of consensus, in my opinion. I think you're going to start to see maybe, some theoretical reaches, maybe some people behind the Ravens want to get up the board a little bit. Maybe there's a big tackle run, big receiver run, so I think 14 is an interesting spot to be, because I feel like it's right around that cutoff area of where, the true first round players, like in most drafts, these guys are first rounders. I think that's where it starts to shift a little bit.
And I think that spot at 14 is why Eric DaCosta has called it like the sweet spot, and why I've predicted that I really think they're just going to stick and pick. For context for our listeners, the last time the Ravens traded up was 2018 to get Lamar Jackson. That was the draft before Eric DaCosta became the general manager, so he hasn't done it. But as you said, like, it's an atypical draft. I want to ask you too later about, like, a lot of people have said that there could be a lot of trades this draft. We're not taking anything off the table. That all said, unless it's Bain, consensus says that the Ravens are likely going to lean offense in the first round, whether that's an interior offensive lineman to address what was wretched in 2025, or maybe it's a receiver or a tight end. But they still need to address the defensive line and the pass rush. Pass rush specifically, who are some high-value pass rushers the Ravens should be eyeing on day 2 or day 3?
Yeah, this class is a little bit interesting because I feel like there is kind of a choose your flavor for edge rushers more so than passiers. I think you have guys that, are going to be more pass rusher based, more like, all right, this guy is going to be in on third downs. He's going to be explosive. He's going to be a guy that we want in kind of those sub package areas. And then there's guys that are a little bit more power based that, you feels like when you look at them, watch your tape, they want to go through your chest and, push the pocket a little bit and whatnot. So, that's kind of how I see the edge class a little bit, and the fact that there's a big, I don't want to say discrepancy, but there's a big, shift in the way that you view these players. So just go through some names, like Zion Young from Missouri is a guy to me that, kind of fits that latter part of it where he's a big power guy, wants to go through your chest. He's going to be mostly a guy that's doing speed to power, going and trying to walk back the offensive tackles. He's a big active run defender, and a player that I really like in this class. You go to Gabe Akis, another player that's from Illinois. He's another guy that's a power player, 6'4", 260. Wants to go through your chest, wants to be physical at the point of attack, wants to push the pocket a little bit. So he makes sense in kind of that role. I'd be curious to see what a guy like R. Mason Thomas is. He a guy that can maybe go late first round? Is he going to be a day 2 player? I think he's one to watch as, if teams only see him as a pass rusher first, which he is. He's explosive. But he's on the bit smaller side. He's not your typical edge rusher size. I think he's 6'2", 241. He could be a guy that makes it down there a little bit into day 2, well into day 2. But I think Akis, I think Zion Young, and Derek Moore, who I believe grew up in the Maryland area. Power edge rusher, guy that's more power focused, that's speed to power, can win on the outside shoulder, and a player that to me is more of a pass rusher right now than a run defender. So if you're looking for more of that, I think that a lot of those guys make sense. I like LT Overton as well, as a guy that can play multiple alignments, play kind of split his time between playing like more of a 3-tech role, 4-eye, versus being a stand-up rusher. I think he fits more of that base defensive end. Maybe he could be a 3-4 defensive end as well. I think he fits a lot of those schemes. He's or can fit in both schemes as in 3-4 or 4-3 as a defensive end. And then Denai Sutton for Penn State. He's a guy to me that tested off the charts. Athleticism really pops. A guy that has enough juice to win on the outside shoulder. He's another guy that can move down and reduce down to the interior because he's big enough at 6'5", 256. I think he's more kind of a complementary edge rusher versus being a number 1 edge rusher, but his ability to drop in coverage too, he did that more so of that in 2024 than he did in 2025, but he has that ability. I think he's a guy that, I don't think he's highly ranked on the consensus board, but I think the NFL is going to really like his size, athleticism, production, and from a school that's produced a lot of edge rushers recently. So I think those are like 4 or 5 guys to me that makes a lot of sense on day 2. I previously thought of Malachi Lawrence from UCF as a guy that's day 2, but seems like he's going to go in the first round at this point. But yeah, I think those other guys are edge rushers that they're interesting and have, tools to work with, or they have a specific skill set that I think, if you're looking for the, more of the run stopper, power based players, you have your options. But if you're looking for more of the explosive edge rushers, I feel like those guys typically go off the board pretty quickly. So I expect a big run on day 2, specifically on edge rushers, because I think maybe you get only two or three selected in the first round.
Now imagine if deny Dennis Sutton and if the Ravens at 14 take Vanga Ioane and suddenly you have a Penn State pipeline, no longer Jordan Stout in that locker room, but get a couple more Penn State guys and create a little bit of a pipeline there would be funny. So on Tuesday, Adam Schefter reported that All-Pro defensive tackle Nnamdi Madubuike, 6 months after his injury, we finally get word that he is expected to return this fall. He had surgery last week, and the Ravens brass have all been super cagey about what's been going on with his injury. We finally get a real genuine update, which is that he had surgery and they're hopeful that he'll be able to play. That all said, Eric DeCosta has said that defensive tackle is kind of a position they'd want to address whether or not they have Nnamdi. So knowing that they should have him back, what's the latest in the draft you're seeing legitimate value to add there? Because maybe the Ravens say, okay, we have Nnamdi coming back. We feel like we're fortified in that interior defensive line, but we want to be able to draft depth. It's a prime position for us. We see so much value in it. What's the latest you could see legitimate value at that position? Just how deep is the interior defensive line class?
Yeah, it's pretty deep. I mean, well into day 3, probably 4th or 5th round areas where I feel comfortable, where you find legitimate, rotational guys or guys that have a path to start eventually. If I'm looking more so in the day 2 area, I think you're going to see a big run of defensive tackles starting in round 2 and possibly in the round 3. I think Christian Miller from Georgia is kind of where you start the conversation. Lee Hunter from Texas Tech. Obviously, we're going to see where Peter Woods, as well as Caleb Banks goes, and Caden McDonald. I think those guys are kind of the consensus top 3. But in terms of the next best available guys, I think Christian Miller, like I mentioned, Lee Hunter are guys that make a lot of sense at that position. Dominique Orange, more of a run stopper, run stuffer. If you're looking for more like that, Darrell Jackson from Florida State. So there are some options there on day 2 and players, and then day 3. I think you can find guys that are maybe a little bit more explosive based, that are a little bit more like they're not going to be eating up double teams, but they're going to be guys getting upfield and making plays as pass rushers and in the backfield as run stoppers. And Grayson Holden from Oklahoma kind of fits that bill. Zane Durant from Penn State is another player too. Both those guys are like undersized defensive tackles. I think they're sub 290. That they weighed in at the combine, but in terms of their explosiveness and what they're able to do to get in the backfield, I think they fit a team that's looking for that type of player. There's a few other guys too. I mean that you could put in that bucket as well. Caleb Proctor, the Southeastern Louisiana defensive tackle who. Small school guy, but has interesting measurables. Had a really good game against LSU, playing up against big competition, and it's kind of that developmental pass rushing type of defensive lineman. Needs to get better in the run game, but really solid player. And then there's plenty of run stoppers on day 3. If you're looking for guys that kind of fill that role and be able to eat double teams, be able to get some backfield penetration as run stoppers, DeMonte Capehart it kind of speaks to me as that type of player. Nick Barrett from South Carolina, Chris McClellan from Missouri, Albert Regis from Texas A&M. So there's going to be plenty of defensive tackle help that you can find on day 2 and early in day 3, where they may play a certain role. Maybe they're rotational players, but I think they can find some nice homes and find some NFL snaps.
You mentioned Caleb Banks, Wesley Williams, another guy from Duke, both those guys I've seen mocked to the Ravens different times. I guess just kind of compare or contrast, or what do you like about those two guys that might make them decent fits in Baltimore?
Yeah, when you talk about Caleb Banks, he is so interesting. I think he's one of the most interesting players in the draft for the fact that he has not played a lot of football. The last couple of years, only played 3 games in 2025. But when he played, I mean, there's a guy that at 6'6", 327 has length and power that really is going to be intriguing for NFL teams. I think he's had a couple foot injuries now in the last couple of years that makes you a little concerned for a guy that size that is relying on his get off and is relying on his athleticism. He ran like a 5.04 40, at the combine, I think, before he re-injured his foot. So you see the athleticism there. You see what he could be if he stays on the field. But the big question is his health, and if you're willing to take that risk. You're going to get a discount probably by taking him. Say the Ravens do take him mid-second round. That's going to be a big discount. Getting a guy like that that has that type of talent, but comes with kind of those injury question marks. It kind of reminds me of Will Johnson falling a little bit in the draft recently, the Michigan defensive back. I think he went like 46 overall to the Cardinals in that particular draft, and he turned out to be a really good value because he was pretty injured during the pre-draft process, but when he was on the field and healthy, he's a guy that really stood out. So I really like him. I think he's a player that, you feel good about taking him mid to late second round, just because there's going to be the injury concern there, but it's not, necessarily. I feel like you feel a little bit better, but than taking him, reaching on him a little bit in round 1. So. I really like him. Then Wesley Williams. I think he was a guy that was down at the Shrine Bowl when I went down to the Shrine Bowl earlier this cycle. Interesting player. I think he's a guy that has some really nice length or some really nice size. Has some pretty good measurables. Player is pretty productive in his final season at Duke. Couple sacks, had a block kick. Player that, plays with some natural leverage, can blow up plays in the run game. Day 3 player that I feel like, can be kind of a rotational guy for the Baltimore Ravens, to take, in round 4, round 5. So, I think both those guys are interesting in different ways. I think with Williams, he's more of, obviously the proven ability, was a multi-year starter. The health concerns not so much, and brings immediate upside of the run game. But obviously with a guy like Caleb Banks, the ceiling is there. The upside is there. It's just going to be about how healthy is he going to be, early in his career, and if he can stay on the field and fix some of the pad level issues he plays with, and being a taller defensive tackle. I think that's always a bit of a challenge trying to translate to an NFL game.
For sure. And one quick note about Wesley Williams, he played for Harlan Bauer, who is now the outside linebackers coach in Baltimore. So there is a little bit of that connection there. He had a lot of good things to say about Harlan at the scouting combine. So wouldn't be totally surprised if the Ravens see him available on day 3 and say, we want to get a guy with some familiarity. Maybe Harlan is vouching for his guy. And at the scouting combine, Wes Williams said something to the effect of like how Harlan will, grab guys by their collar and throw them out there. And he's got the most energy at practice. And that's exactly what he loved about having him as a coach. Wouldn't be surprised there. Devin, when I asked you to come on this podcast, I told you, we're going to focus a lot on the defensive side. I had seen that lately you had written a lot about the defense, and I wanted to kind of key in on some of these positions in the later rounds for the defense, for the Ravens, and where they might look on day 2 and 3. Then I saw your mock draft. And your latest mock draft, Devin Jackson's 4.0 for the Philadelphia Inquirer, has Penn State's Wenger Ioane, Utah's Spencer Fano, and Miami's Francis Maui Noah, all off the board before the Ravens are on the clock at 14. I've seen several mocks with at least 2 of those guys off the board. I don't know if I've seen many others with all 3. So I guess maybe a 2-parter, like that eliminates the possibility of drafting an O-lineman on Thursday night for the Ravens. It sort of just kind of eliminates that possibility entirely. Why do you think all 3 go so high there? What would that mean for the Ravens?
Yeah, I think because of where the NFL sits right now, they are always looking for offensive linemen to come in and be immediate contributors. I think to me, what has really shifted and made it difficult, I think two pieces of news. Jordan Tyson being a guy that came in and, reignited the top 10 talks, going early in the first round. And a lot of people believing he's not going to get past the Rams at 13. So I think that's kind of thrown a wrench into things because he was a guy to me that was kind of all over the place. Like sometimes he'd be in the top 15, sometimes he wouldn't be. And I think that has made it such an interesting dynamic in terms of where does he fit in mock drafts? Could he be a guy for the Ravens? Could he be a guy for someone else? And then two is the Giants trading Dexter Lawrence for the number 10 pick. And I say that because I don't think it is a foregone conclusion that, the Giants are just going to go Sonny Styles / Caleb Downs or Sonny Styles / Jordan Tyson or, Sonny Styles / Tyson, so like all those scenarios where people expect to go defense off, weapon, so I think, I made like Ioane come off the board first, and just in this particular scenario because what the Giants do want to, kind of bolster their interior offensive line. They have kind of a discount pick there at 10, and, they're not going to get a chance to really upgrade their offensive line, most likely on day 2, because there's a good chance that all the top guards in this class, Ioane, Chase Basantis, and Emmanuel Pregnon are all off the board by the time they pick in the second round. So I think that's part of it. And then Miami, I think they're a wild card in who they could take. Some people think they could take corners. Some could think they could take offensive tackle. And I think I had them training up to get Caleb Downs in that particular scenario. So it's kind of messed things up a little bit. And then the Browns were picking at 11, and obviously they're going to pick offensive line. Most people seem to think they will with their first pick. So, yeah, I think it just kind of, again, with those scenarios, there's a good chance that the offensive linemen are coming off the board much sooner than we think, and there's supposed to be 7 to 8 projected players on the offensive line taken in the first round, and you just don't know where that run is going to start. It could start as early as 3, where if the Cardinals do stick and pick, or if they take Malinoa, or if they take Fano, then it kind of even more so, I think, changes the equation on, all right, there's teams behind the Ravens that need offensive linemen. Are they going to get super aggressive in trying to get some of the remaining guys? I think that's kind of what led me to do this particular scenario, because I do think offensive line, no matter what's happening, I know safeties and linebackers and, tight ends in terms of Sadiq or, kind of the non-premium positions that people, are making cases for. But offensive line to me is always going to be in demand. And, that's kind of how I ended with that particular scenario. And thinking that, teams are going to want to take offensive line a little bit early, especially if there are players that, maybe have injury question marks, maybe they have fit question marks for those teams picking. I think about Nnamdi Madubuike as kind of a big equalizer in this too, because, recent news has come out that, maybe he may not be healthy for his rookie season. So he was a guy to me that, if Mansour Delane was gone, at 12, then all of a sudden the Cowboys would feel comfortable taking one Nnamdi Madubuike. Well, that's not the case anymore. So I think there's been a kind of ebbs and flows, I would say, of news out there. Sometimes you have to parse through it, sometimes you don't. And then for me, when I have uncertainty, is there a chance for this team to take offensive line? I always think about doing that in these particular scenarios.
It makes sense, and I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on that, because it's been such a repeatable topic over the last, let's call it 2 years, because, watching and covering the Eagles, like, between the Eagles Super Bowl and the Seahawks Super Bowl, there's been such an emphasis on the trenches, which maybe there wasn't in the past, and there's been a lot of criticism on Eric DeCosta for focusing on sort of the more starry positions and filling the outside, not doing enough to fill the trenches. Do you feel like that, to your point about 3 offensive linemen going in the first 15 picks is a nod to just the way that the NFL has acknowledged the last 2 Super Bowl winners and what's succeeded for them is just making sure you're doing your absolute best to invest in the trenches. Does that feel like a league-wide thing, or is that just being siloed here in Baltimore?
I think it's a league-wide thing. I think teams are recognizing like you can't really get by anymore with just having stars. You have to be able to have guys that maybe you're not valuing typically in the past. Maybe you're not valuing interior offensive line, in the past in the first round. But you think about the lack of what this class lacks. It lacks like the second tier of edge rushers. After the top three are going to most likely be gone in the first 5 or 6 picks. It lacks, a number of cornerbacks that legitimately have a chance to go in the top 10 and the top 15. I think Mansour Delane is the guy that potentially could be the only corner that comes off the board in that range. I think about just the receivers as well, like the uncertainty around the receiver position. I know everyone likes to talk about receivers, and I think Carnell Tate is clearly going to be the first one off the board, at least in my opinion. But it's Jordan Tyson. How soon is he going to go? Then after Tyson, is it going to be Mekhi Lemon or Casey Concepcion? Could Omar Cooper Jr. make it a run at that position? And I feel like a lot of those guys feel more like late teens. So I think, when offensive lineman, I feel like with offensive line in general, you can always sell that to fans. You can always sell that to team building because they are important. They are kind of the backbone and kind of the structure of your offense. And the longer that you go and ignore them and try to get stopgaps, it eventually, kind of, backfires against you, where all of a sudden, where the depth you thought you had just wasn't good enough. I think the Eagles ran into that problem this year, with Lane Johnson. He was dealing with injuries. Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson were banged up. And you saw the difference it made when their offensive line wasn't healthy versus when it was for their Super Bowl run. Same with the Seahawks. When they had a banged up offensive line, they shored it up this year, and obviously the defense played a big part in that. But having a healthy offensive line, but also having a mix of like veterans and young players, and a developing succession plan for these guys that are maybe a little bit older, I think has become a little bit more of a priority. You think about the Lions; they're kind of stuck right now, and kind of in that right now, because all of a sudden Taylor Decker is done with them, and now they need a left tackle, or maybe they're going to move Penei Sewell to the left side and have a right tackle and draft a right tackle, and all of a sudden you're drafting, maybe for need versus like, for a guy that in a couple of years can grow into something better. So I think it's like a delicate balance. Like, you don't want to just take offensive lineman to take offensive lineman, but if there's a chance to improve your room, even though you have a veteran in place already, why not do that versus like, trying and hoping that maybe you can get a guy on day 2 or day 3 that can come in and compete. I think history has shown, especially for offensive tackles, you find more success taking like an offensive tackle on day 1. If you're going to get a premium guard, and be kind of a plug and play starter, those guys tend to, give you kind of you reap the rewards of your investment, so to speak, in those types of players. I think, specifically in the interior offensive line, I think it becomes interesting to see. All right, sometimes day 2 interior offensive linemen hit a little better than round 1 guys, but I think it becomes kind of a case by case scenario, obviously. But yeah, I think overall, I think the league is recognizing the offensive line is an important position to draft, and why it's so crucial for teams to do so.
So let's say all 3 of those guys maybe are off the board. At 14, you have the Ravens taking Oregon tight end Kenyon Sadiq. Seems like a lot of people are kind of split on him, whether or not he belongs going that high, or whether he, might fall to later in the first round. Devin, why do you feel like you're on the right side of history with Kenyon Sadiq?
Yeah, I think this one was a tough one to parse, because I do agree that his range has been tough to nail down, to figure out where exactly does he fit, especially being really the only tight end that's going to go round one in this particular draft class, or most likely to go the only one. But yeah, I think when you look at the way that a really good tight end could do for you, especially in the passing game, especially as a guy that can stay on the field in blocking situations. I don't think he's going to be like a 90% inline player at the NFL level, but what he's able to do on the move, what he's able to do in space as a blocker, then when he can do with the ball in his hands, stretch the field vertically. I think that gives you a big advantage for an NFL offense, having a talent like that. I don't think you're expecting him to be a guy that you build around the offense with in year one, but in year 3, year 4, maybe he is that guy. And I think that's where you kind of figure out, all right, where am I in my team building process? Do I use 12 personnel a lot? Do I use multiple tight ends a lot? Then I think that's where you can start to find the value in taking a player like Sadiq, because he can be as good as, maybe one of your slot receivers that commands only 3 to 4 targets a game. Well, what if you gave that to Sadiq and had him matched up with linebackers and safeties and get those ideal matchups, and then all of a sudden you have someone that can legitimately be a threat over the middle of the field, and it makes you tougher to defend. So I think all those things said, I think Sadiq, making the case for him, I think, he's not just a receiving tight end. He's not going to be, 100% inline guy either. But I think he's going to be one of the best blend of both, really until you get to like maybe round 3 or round 4, where the receiving outside isn't going to be as big as him. And maybe there's some other guys that, you feel good about being, can do a little bit of both. But I think he is a guy, that comes in and you're going to find a role for him. You're going to find a guy that can immediately upgrade your offense and stay on the field, most importantly. I don't think he's just going to be a guy that you split out and have to just mainly use him as a slot receiver.
Devin, this has been excellent. So I really appreciate how generous you've been with your time. Just last question before I'm going to let you go. You had said at the outset of the show that you felt like this is an atypical draft, that there's a possibility that maybe there's some trades or some movement or things just kind of get weird on Thursday night. I'd ask you, what do you predict as the possible most out-of-pocket thing that could happen on Thursday night? Because, again, some people are predicting a heavy trade night. Within the realm of possibility, but also totally out of pocket.
I've seen a lot of people say maybe the Cowboys trade up all the way to 3. I don't think they do that, but I can see maybe a team in the teens that gets really, really antsy and just really takes their shot at a player. I think Carolina, to me, feels like a team that could do that, where I did that in mock draft 3.0 actually, where I had them move up from 19 to 13 to take Sadiq, because it feels like they're a team that has really gone all in on Bryce Young, and understanding this is kind of a really strong window for them to really get aggressive. So I feel like Carolina is one of those teams that could get really aggressive come draft night. I don't think we're talking a ton about them as being a team that can really make some waves. They have a low-key need at left tackle. They have Ike Ekwonu, who's coming back from a knee injury that he suffered in January during the playoffs, I believe, or right before the playoffs. And I am not totally convinced that they won't get aggressive and maybe they move up to 11, to get like a Monroe Freeling, or if Spencer Fano is there at 11, or, Francis Mauigoa is there. I think they're a team, a sleeper team, in my opinion, that, has the assets. They are kind of in a window where they want to be a serious contender and potentially, I don't want to say a win now team, but a team that is pushing the chips in a little bit to really improve and kind of take that next step as a potential contender in the NFC, especially NFC South, now that Tampa has gotten weaker. New Orleans and Atlanta are kind of in a rebuilding mode right now. I think Carolina is a team to watch, as How far they could go up, I'm not sure, but I know like Miami is looking to trade out of 11. I think the Giants could be a team that trade out of 10. I don't know if they'd be willing to go back all the way to 19, but I do think Carolina is a team to watch that, I think people might be a little surprised if they go up and fly up the board to get someone that they truly want. Who that it is, I don't know, but it feels like a team that they're at 19 right now, but, they, one, want a safety, and two, want off the tackle. Well, off the tackle is certainly going to be there in the early, 10, 11, 12 range. And then if Caleb Downs, if he somehow gets past 10 or, to 11, could they be in the mix for him at that spot? So I think Carolina's a team to watch on Thursday night. I just can't imagine a scenario where they don't try to get up and get a player that they really want, because I feel like they've shown everything that's shown me that they've done this offseason. They're not just willing to stay put. They signed Jalen Phillips and I believe Devin Lloyd as well, and made some big splashes in free agency. Why stop there, and continue to push the envelope? And I think Carolina's a team to watch for sure.
Mm-hmm. He's Devin Jackson. He's in Pittsburgh all week. You can read his work at the Philadelphia Inquirer. You can follow him on Twitter at @RealD_Jackson. Devin, thank you so much for joining the Early Birds podcast. You're the man.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam.
This season, Fast Play Home Run Riches from the Maryland Lottery has a whole new prize. Players who enter the Contestant of the Game promotion will have a chance to win a VIP game day experience, including $2,000 for being selected, premium seat access, and more. Please play responsibly.
Big thanks again to Devin for sitting down with us. As we mentioned in the interview, he just got to Pittsburgh, got settled, had a busy couple days ahead of him. So we're excited to follow along with all his coverage, and he obviously provided a lot of insight. Matt, I told you before we jumped on off air that I was shocked to see his mock draft include 3 interior offensive linemen before the Ravens go at 14. It's certainly a possibility. We got into a little bit about like how that's sort of the way the NFL might be going. It was fascinating to hear his thoughts on that, but boy, wouldn't that be interesting if all 3 of those guys are off the board and the Ravens are left. Maybe they get Kenyon Sadiq or a different guy. Like that totally changes their options if none of those 3 are available at 14. So it'll be interesting to watch. But anyway, we got some Orioles talk because you are in Kansas City as we speak. By the time people listen to this, I assume you'll be back in Baltimore, right? By the time this goes up, at least on a plane, perhaps.
I'll actually be on a bachelor party, or on a plane back to go to a bachelor
Even
party.
better.
So, yeah, I know it's been a crazy week.
That's awesome. Well, so Matt, I know that earlier in the season we had this whole conversation about them bouncing back against the White Sox, and you and I talked off air about this kind of being a similar situation against what most folks think is a better team in the Royals. Let's just kind of run through this, this week. What were your biggest takeaways aside from Kobe Mayo hitting a baseball onto the moon? What were your biggest takeaways from the series?
Yeah, Mayo certainly looked locked in Kansas City. 2 3-run home runs, each breaking his personal record for longest home run of his MLB career. One went 439, I believe, and another one was 452.
Insane.
So, just eye-popping numbers for him. But just for the week as a whole, it was a tough start to this road trip for the Orioles, who lost 3 of 4 to Cleveland. Manager Craig Albernaz's former team nearly were no hit in one of those games by Parker Messick. But really the offense in general just wasn't clicking. The rotation has not really gotten going at all. And they go into Kansas City, a team that was struggling equally on a lengthy losing streak with the worst record in the American League. And they're able to take 2 of 3 against them. And all were very competitive seesaw games. Each team held the lead at one point of each of the 3 games. But the Orioles, they go and win one in extra innings the first night. The second one, they lose in really brutal fashion on a walk-off wild pitch by Ryan Helsley. And then the third game, they jump out to a really big lead, kind of make it a little closer for comfort than they'd like, but Anthony Nunez comes in and converts his first career MLB save to lock that down, an 8-6 win to send them back home, where they will then face the Boston Red Sox first AL East series of the season for the Orioles. So true measuring stick opportunity for them. But this road trip, a lot of lows to be clear. I mean, they come out of it, with a losing record on the trip and need a couple of wins to get over 500. But this team, still kind of hanging around here as far as, not letting the season get away from them like a team like the Royals have to this point, or the Mets are in the National League completely spiraling. That has not happened. And you look across the American League right now, it is very wide open. Nobody is really pulling away. So you need to see more. There's I think the win that they had on Wednesday was a very complete win, particularly for their lineup. To have really contributions from all over, top of the lineup, bottom of the lineup, but also to score early, score late, to score by the home run, to string together hits for a rally. They kind of did it all to plate those 8 runs against Kansas City. So I thought a very encouraging game for them, particularly for guys like Pete Alonso and Colton Cowser, who have been struggling, but really, just finishing that on a high note now, going into a series against Boston, I think was really critical.
I mean, we've seen there are a lot of reasons for Orioles fans to be disappointed, frustrated, confused. What the heck's going on with this team? Bottom line, these guys are fighting. They're not going to let this season fall apart. And I think that's the solace that fans can take, is that no one is letting this season completely unravel. You can pick apart. I mean, this was talked about in our Orioles Slack channel of, like, you can go down the line and say, hey, this is wrong with this guy, this is wrong with this guy, he should be playing up to this level, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. The broad stroke look at this, like, these guys are not rolling over. And maybe that's the Craig Alvarez effect. Maybe that's the Pete Alonso effect. Maybe it's Shane Baz. Maybe it's, I don't know, Taylor Ward. Who knows? You would know better than I.
But there's just that there's so many different faces too, is in and of itself, like, just I think shows that this is a different team than the one last year. Like, the young core, is gotten smaller than it used to be as far as how much of the roster it takes up, particularly with guys like Holiday and Jordan Westberg sidelined, Ryan Mountcastle out for extended period. Like, this is a bit of a different team that is built in new ways with some free agent spending, but also guys like Jeremiah Jackson, who was a minor league free agent signing, making a huge impact. You have Leody Taveras, an under the radar guy who was DFA just last year, who has been huge for this offense so far. And we actually have a story coming out just this morning on him from some conversations I had here in Kansas City. So excited for people to read that.
Becoming a recurring theme when you and I talk Orioles is, hey, they've sucked the last couple of days. Matt, who's a guy that's going to get them back on track? And you said Taylor Ward the first time. Who did you say the second time? Because Leody Taveras, I feel like, would have been the answer for this little stretch in Kansas City. I'm not remembering who you said.
I said Cade Povich, who's not back yet, but did have a great start in AAA. So I think that we'll have to wait and see on when exactly he comes back to the major leagues. But I do think that Cade Povich is going to make an impact for this team at some point this year. I did want to talk about Colton Cowser, though, because Colton Cowser has been at the center of conversation among Orioles fans this week, particularly as he went through a brutal stretch entering play on Wednesday, had not had a hit since April 14th. Really tough stretch for him. I believe that was 8 straight games without a hit for him. And he comes out, and it really started on Tuesday night. He grounds into a double play, right, coming off the bench, which doesn't sound great. But he hit it on the screws, 103 miles per hour, right at the first baseman, who flipped it, turned it for a double play. But that swing right there was something that both him and manager Craig Alvarez, they saw something. They felt something there of, okay, a lot of the work that Cowser has been putting in, maybe it was paying off on that swing right there. And then he comes out here, gets to start on Wednesday, and has 2 hits. One on a fastball center cut, but he hit it 112.5 miles per hour. I think it was his hardest hit ball of the season. Goes for a double, hits it into the corner. It's absolutely on the screws. And then second hit was on a changeup, which is a pitch he has notoriously struggled against this year. Down and away, and he waits on it a little bit, gets down on the ball, and is able to flip it out into the outfield for a single. Both completely different hits on completely different pitches, but also, I think, representative of the things he can do when he gets his pitch, hitting it as hard as he did, but also his ability to adjust, which has been the question, because he hasn't been able to adjust, and a lot of pitchers have been taking advantage of that, giving him nothing but off speed. If he can just do things like that, where either it's laying off the pitch or it's getting enough contact to get those cheap singles, things like that, then he's going to start seeing the fastballs, and that's when he's going to be able to do the damage that we have seen Colton Cowser do in the past. And he talked after the game on Wednesday about some of the work he has been putting putting in. I thought it was interesting. He came into the season having worked all offseason on having his hands in his stance farther away from his body, right? And what that does is allows him as a hitter to try and get to pitches on the outside of the zone. And that for him was kind of a problem. He was getting pitched a lot of breaking balls outside. He wasn't able to get to them. So he was like, okay, hold my hands farther away from my body. I'll be able to get to those pitches. But it had the opposite effect. His swing was slower. He wasn't getting his hands all the way around, particularly on the balls inside. And all of a sudden, he's now not even hitting his own pitches. And that kind of spiraled and created this domino effect that led to his massive slump to begin the year. Now he's holding his hands closer to his body again, kind of getting back into what was successful for him as a rookie in 2024. And suddenly we're now seeing him make the kind of contact we know he can make. So I thought that was interesting. It's obviously baby steps at this point. It's 2 hits amid a stretch where he's still hitting but well below 200. So he has a long way to go before he can start to reclaim, we were talking about him before the years, being the guy to be the everyday center fielder. He's got to earn that back at this point. I mean, the way some of the guys around him have played, he's kind of fallen into a timeshare in terms of playing time. So he's going to have to earn his way back in the everyday lineup. But certainly I thought his performance on Wednesday was super encouraging.
Matt, where could people read about all this great insight?
It's all at the Baltimore Sun, baby. Actually, all of that was in my 3 takeaways from today's game or Wednesday's game. So certainly go on BaltimoreSun.com or pick up a paper and check out those takeaways, as well as some stuff on Anthony Nunez that I thought was really interesting as he got the save on Wednesday, and also the lineup and how everybody fared. I did want to run through a couple of quick injury updates. Adley Rutschman's back. He was activated off the injured list without a rehab stint. Had 2 hits, including his first home run in Tuesday's game. Did have a bit of a rough day behind the plate. 4 wild pitches, including the one that ultimately decided the game on a play where he tried to backhand a bouncing ball and it got away, and Maikel Garcia was able to score from third. Had he been able to corral that ball, that run doesn't score, and maybe the Orioles are able to force extra innings in that game. Ultimately doesn't happen. So certainly a bit of an up and down first game for him, but also Jackson Holliday, tough news for him. He was pulled from his first game back for AAA Norfolk on his second rehab assignment, and is coming back to Baltimore. He had an MRI on Wednesday. We don't yet know the results of that, but he has right hand discomfort, which is the hand that he broke the hamate bone in, and has also experienced wrist soreness. So it has been a saga, to say the least, for Jackson Holliday. Clearly, there is no near return for him impending at this moment, and second base is just Jeremiah Jackson's to lose.
Yeah, Jeremiah Jackson's played his butt off, so I think in the short term, good for him.
They seem to be in okay shape. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough to see a guy like Jackson Holliday, just so much potential, came in so like that. You just hate to see it for a guy like that.
Yeah, no, it's a tough break for him, and certainly with already concern over what a hamate bone does to a player's power when they do come back, for him to now be looking like missing the entire first month of the season, if not longer. Just how much he is able to contribute to this 2026 team is very much up in the air. He will probably be back at some point. I don't think there's any concern about that unless something drastic has happened and we find that out in the MRI. But right now it is a long road back for Holliday, and he is certainly not out of the woods yet.
Yeah, we got a busy draft week coverage, but hopefully next week, once we get through this weekend, either whether it's you and me or you and Josh, we'll get a chance to really catch up and get into the nitty gritty on everything that's been going on, because there's a lot going on in Birdland, but obviously this week is very NFL draft focused. So we're excited to kind of come back next week and catch up more in detail on just the state of the Orioles, which will be fun and exciting.
Yep. But in the meantime, it is all Ravens, and we have a ton of stuff coming at you. We are here on Thursday morning with an episode, and we'll be back in less than 24 hours with another. Sam and Josh will join Brian Wacker, fellow Ravens reporter from The Sun, out in Owings Mills shortly after the conclusion of round 1 to talk about the pick and any other notable takeaways for the Ravens from the first day. And then on Monday morning, we'll have a full draft recap looking at days 2 and 3 and just looking at the draft class as a whole. So super excited to break all of that down. Like I said, I'm going to be at a bachelor party, so I'm going to be following everything along from there. But trust me, my friends are as much into football as I am, so it will be on. Very much looking forward to hearing all of you guys' coverage on Thursday and then joining in for Monday's episode. So Sam, any final words for the good people?
I hope you have the best time at this bachelor party. I got a couple long days, long nights ahead of me, and it'll be a lot of fun to see. I mean, this is possibly the most consequential offseason of Eric DeCosta's tenure as GM. What they do will matter. There will be a magnifying glass on every single decision they make, what picks they make, how many picks they make, who comes out of this, whether they get funky or whether they stick and pick with all 11. Everything is going to be diagnosed with the needle and thread. So I'm excited to just kind of see how these next couple of days unravel, and excited to break it down with you and the guys.
He's Sam Cohn. I'm Matt Weyrich. Thank you all so much for listening, and have a good one.